interview folks in my network that I've worked with or I've met recently and ask them about their job search journey, their career, and get some best advice and tips to share across the podcast land, I guess you could say. So again, I'm Henry, founder of Talent Roadmap. I've done Notion playbooks, I've done coaching, but I think this year and moving forward, I'm going to be talking to people and capturing their stories. So today I have Lisa. Lisa, remind me your last name again.
Garrelts.
Okay, Lisa Garrelts. Funny story about how we met. I actually shared a very vulnerable story on LinkedIn about bombing this interview with the vice president of recruiting who asked me what my greatest strengths and weaknesses were. And I wasn't prepared. I said something along the lines of, well, I work well in teams and sometimes I send emails with typos. So that's a true story. This was like 2022 or whatnot. And I was kind of like frustrated about that question. So I shared the story online on LinkedIn specifically. Unbeknownst to me, it started taking off. People were resonating with it. And Lisa was one of the first people to comment and say, this is such a dumb scenario. Like, why would people even still ask this question? So we started chatting in the thread and realized she was also in TA. So we've been kind of catching up over the holidays and finally got this podcast episode up and running for you all. Today, I'm going to just freestyle like I usually do and ask, Lisa about her story, and we'll have some follow-up questions on specific things that I feel are important and unique to her journey. So before that, Lisa, if you want to give a quick intro about yourself, and we can go from there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And good morning again to California. I'm Lisa. I'm working in talent acquisition since 16 years. Oh my God. Sometimes I'm really asking myself if it's been that long, but it is.
Right.
And I've been starting my journey in the classic sense in headhunting, where I was working across UK, Southern France, Germany, and Switzerland. And then at some point, after a few years, I started to go corporate to see how is the landscape in terms of processes, complexity, responsibilities, projects, etc. And it was a very interesting journey. I was moving my way up to management in the previous couple of years and focusing a little bit more on the innovation side of things in terms of talent acquisition. And this is why I was really kicked by your story on what you shared, because I it truly resonates, because I still see so many hiring managers, but also C-suite executives that are sometimes doing a very, let's say, old school way of trying to find talents and asking them questions. But yeah, no, really happy to connect and sharing my story with you.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks for that intro. So essentially, I guess let's start with the post. Right, that's where it all like, kind of just came about. And when you saw the post, did it bother you? Did it kind of make you laugh? What was going through your mind when you kind of came across the LinkedIn post?
That's an excellent question. I think, yeah, it was bothering me a little bit because I was like, gosh, it's 2024. I think it was end of the year, beginning of 2025. People are still asking these questions. And I just find that there is so much better questions, but at the same time, also processes that could have been done better in the past couple of years. A lot of companies are still not there yet.
Right.
I was just like, yeah, okay, that question was like 15 years ago, maybe 20. Yeah, it kind of bothered me a little bit, but at the same time, I was, let's say, disappointed, but not surprised.
Right. Okay. Cool. Yeah. I think I felt the same way too. Actually, more so surprised. Yeah. Very surprised, actually. Okay. Well, let's talk about how you got into TA. What do you enjoy about it? And I think the big question too, if you can fix it and create a system or a philosophy around what makes the most sense, what would that look like? So how did you get into TA? What do you enjoy about it? And then how would you fix it?
Absolutely. How I got into it? Well, I have to start a little bit earlier when I was in school. I realized at some point, because I had a bit of struggles, I just recently got diagnosed with ADHD and autism, and everything just made sense, how things developed and how things have been back in the days. But it was a lot of hurdles. I had very bad grades in school. I had to find a very creative way on getting into a job. And in Germany, there was a very, very new kind of apprentice where you do like a dual study. So you study, but at the same time you work. in a
Mm-hmm.
company, and it was in personal consulting. So I was like, okay, that sounds interesting. And my dad, he knew someone, so he was just kind of like connecting me with that person. And we got along with each other quite well, and we said, okay, we give it a try. So this is how things started. I had the apprentice for 3 years, which is very standard and basic for Germany. And then during that time, I was learning to actually understand clients, their
Mm-hmm.
needs, their culture, what they're looking for, the different roles, which was very interesting because I was diving into different profiles, different industries. So I was on the consulting side, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then finding the right talents and matching them with the client needs. And this was
Okay.
like a beautiful intersection. So I learned sales, but at the same time, I also learned recruitment. And
Mm-hmm.
that was a beautiful synergy that came together because I also worked with very, very talented recruiters that have done that job even before the apprentice. So
Right.
I really learned a lot about clients, how to find clients as well. So I've
Okay.
really done a lot of sales. And then basically, when the apprentice finished, I also gave it a try to do it on my own. So this is where I started
Mm-hmm.
traveling around, like in UK, in southern
Wow.
France. So I was just using my laptop basically. And during that time, and this is already around 12 years ago, I realized, hey, I have my laptop. I was at the beach in southern
Yeah.
France. I
Okay.
was finding candidates and I was matching them with clients potentially. I realized I can do this stuff completely remotely. And back in the
Mm.
days, wasn't a topic yet. I mean,
Right.
most companies still had like even these huge computers,
Right.
where
Right.
you use the foot to push the button to turn it on, these old things back in the days. And basically, I started as well my journey there to think a little bit more about what that means in future if you can work with your laptop. Also,
Mm-hmm.
like cultural perspective, right? And this is when I like slowly started moving a little bit into the corporate side to actually have a bit more of a holistic view. What I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned earlier in terms of like process landscape, politics, something I totally didn't consider when I started in corporate back in the
Right.
day,
Right.
like all these kind of things that make the job in talent acquisition quite complex, but at the same time you have such a steep learning curve where I was really yeah, surprised. So I started in corporate in the first big bank when I finally moved to Switzerland. And it was very interesting. I mean, I was just a number. I was one of many. We have all
Mm-hmm.
done the same job. We have had similar, let's say, years of experience, etc. And we had very, very standardized like questionnaires and
Right.
processes on how we are going to find and hire these talents.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of like today, I know it's my ADHD and autism, but I kind of like felt that back in the days it was a bit rigid. So
Right.
I'm not a big fan of like using too standardized like templates and stuff because I think at the end of the day, humans are very complex as well, and
Mm-hmm.
everyone is different. They have different characters. So the argument back in the days regarding the bank was to say from a management point of view that we ask the same questions. So we have, how do you say that word in English?
Fairness, equity, consistency. Yeah. Okay.
Consistency, kind of. But at the same time, I just wasn't a fan because I think that humans are never consistent. We have emotions, we are different. You never know if someone has a bad day or whatever. So um, I started to go a little bit around the process. I think nowadays I can talk openly about it, but I started to just ask questions based on my gut feeling and asking questions based on what information I might need. If you have an introverted person, I think you have to ask a lot more questions and you have to ask a bit more detailed questions to really get the answers you need and you want to
Mm-hmm.
take an informed decision on hiring or giving a recommendation to hiring management. I think this was the moment when I started to realize that I can also trust my gut. And
Mm-hmm.
today I know that a good ability, and this is also maybe shaping a little bit my philosophy, is that I can immediately identify if someone is genuine or not. And I
Right.
think this is the big trick. If you are
Mm-hmm.
able to identify genuinity in a person, I think it makes the hiring process a lot easier. Quite frankly speaking, without arrogance, but with a lot of confidence, I've hired like more than 1,300 people already, despite having so many projects internationally. And I've never had one person that was failing probation period or that was fired because of bad behavior or something like that, you know? Like it never happened. And when it happened, it was usually when the hiring was made against my recommendation. Yeah,
Yeah.
so these things, and I think that at some point, you, at least myself, I started to just really use my gut feeling, feel the room, like seeing how is the mood of the person, and then I am adapting to the person in the room. And I also started like 10 years ago to believe firmly that people do not have to fit dedicatedly a company culture, but they should add to a company culture, and that a company culture should have utmost inclusion, that everyone is welcome to also foster like innovation. And there, I think I experienced that a lot of companies are not moving on the same wave
Right.
as
Right. Right.
I would love to. But yeah, it's part of the game. But I think when it comes to questions, etc., it really depends on the role. It really depends on the person. Honestly, these cultural fit interviews that are still
Yeah.
like existing in a lot of companies where they're like, yeah, it's HR. I don't like HR. I don't like the word in human resources. It's people and culture in my world. But you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
the people that are still using like the HR term and stuff, and when they're requesting like
Mm-hmm.
cultural fit interviews, I'm always like, that's really giving me a hard time
Yeah.
from a cultural perspective,
Oh my God.
speaking. But yeah, I think my philosophy is really to stay human, to stay grounded, and to really adapt to the person in the room. And I think then you will have the ability. If you become their friend, so I learned to make friends. If you become
Mm-hmm.
their friend, they are sharing information much more openly, which is
Mm-hmm.
for me, in my world, in my talent acquisition world, super important, because the more information I have, the better decisions I can take, the better recommendations I can give, and also people that I have to potentially avoid hiring. So I think, yeah, that's for me very, very crucial.
My gosh, so many, like, I guess it's called silver linings, but everything you touched on, I'm like, that's exactly how I think. That's how I would do it. And I was never able really to. So you talked about how you got in TA, what you enjoyed about it, but in that whole idea of or conversation or explanation, there are some things I picked up that I was never able to really articulate in my conversations. Because in my head, I'm like, you just talk to people. Like, or if a hiring manager or a new interviewer is like, how do we interview? I'm like, you just chat, like you just hang out with them, you get to
Exactly.
know them. And I feel like
Exactly.
I could never really explain that clearly to folks. So thank you for doing that much better than I could ever have. But you're right. 1,300 folks in your career, that's an insane amount of people hired. And that's, I think from a, we'll call it a networking perspective, right? These are 1,300 new friends that you have across the globe that remembered your experience, your conversation, how you treated them. And people don't think about that oftentimes. And I'm currently consulting contracting for an AI startup. It's a wonderful startup. And we're working with agencies that are sending folks in. And this one conversation I had the other day, actually yesterday, this individual kind of showed up and said, hey, I tried to build rapport initially, right? Say we were talking about, I forget what we were discussing. And then he opens up like, hey, so what's this role about? And I was like, oh my God, this is going to be a bad one. So who are you working with? Which agency? Do you know anything about us? He's like, no, I'm talking to a lot of recruiters. I really don't know who the person I'm talking to, but what do you guys do? And I'm like, this is going to go really bad. We lasted all of 5 minutes. And I said, well, I don't think this role would be a fit for you. And he kind of acknowledged, yes, you're right. It wouldn't be a fit because I don't work in that technology, but can you send a resume to the hiring manager to see if they think otherwise? And in my head, I'm like, this is crazy. Like, why are we even here? So I think people don't understand those type of conversations happen, and we have to like diffuse it in a manner where we're not necessarily being disrespectful or, just, yeah, disrespectful in the moment. But to have the interview go really well, that first point of contact, it needs to be adapting to their body language and vice versa. The candidate, we can tell, like you said, genuinely, if they're excited about the role, if they're aligned with the mission, if their heart is where, which is kind of cheesy to say, but you can definitely take away from the conversation, like if they really want to do this. And it could be maybe not even the job, but if they're aligned to the people and what maybe the hobbies are, or the personality types, or the way they do work. And it could be questions around documentation. It could be questions around, what do you do for fun, and what are some challenges outside of work. And I always have this extended conversation when I meet folks that either do endurance events or some type of martial arts or like surfing, because there's certain components and thinking in those type of activities as well. And I once hired, and she'll if she watches it, she'll know who she is. Vice President of Business Development at Kimura, a health tech company I worked for. She was a triathlete. I said, wow, that's really, really impressive. And obviously the rest of the resume and the conversation went really well. But I told my my hiring manager, who was the chief revenue officer, I'm like, you should hire her because yes, she's fantastic on paper and she's great in conversation, but she's also a triathlete. She'll get shit done no matter what. Like I couldn't even imagine being an Ironman and all the training it takes to that goes into that. So those are things that we kind of like to have our spidey senses on, and it's not necessarily just like the rubric that you mentioned, right? The age old, like ask these 10 questions, let's put them into a data set, let's see what pops out. It still bothers me to this day that most folks are focused on how many folks can we interview, how many goes through the funnel, at what stage do we have the most drop-offs. And I want to say, let's do the reverse. Like, let's just talk to 10 people. Let's just make sure at the very forefront, we have our conversations and we only move forward those 10 folks, and we assess how well we do as an interviewing panel rather than how many folks we can get in and,
right,
convert in the funnel. So there's a component to talent or recruiting or hiring, whatever you want to call it, that I feel needs to be less about the metrics and the reporting. It's important, but it needs to really just focus on, and I don't know how you measure this, right? How much they enjoyed that specific first conversation and how much they enjoyed the second, third, fourth. And I think they call it talent density, but candidate experience, but there's components to that folks are trying to systemize. But no, just wanted to share, like, every time you mentioned something that was literally resonating with me, like, man, that's spot on. Like, this is not the way to do it, but it is probably one of the best ways to do it. I'm probably being biased, but
right.
it was refreshing for you to hear that from you. And so I'll pass it back to you for any thoughts there.
No, honestly, I think, first of all, on what you touched earlier, I think I fully agree that everyone should receive an honest feedback. Like, it is so important. If someone's not suited for the role, or I don't know, you have throughout the process different candidates and one is better than the other or whatever, and you have like strategic measures you take into consideration before taking a decision on taking someone on board, I think it's super important that everyone and every single candidate should have a feedback.
Yeah.
And I also see and realize that a lot of companies are trying to save costs and not having enough resources covered in talent acquisition, which makes it very complicated to deal with mass amount of applicants.
Right.
And also the market has changed in the sense that the economy is not very well off at the moment since 1 or 2 years. So you have like plenty of people as well applying. So sometimes you have 500-600 CVs. I get that it's complicated to actually give everyone a proper feedback. And sometimes maybe one candidate can fall through the cracks. It can happen, but usually they are reaching out. And I find it like super important to just tell them what's really going on. And I am very, very transparent in that. And I think this is why a lot of people, and the feedback I received usually from people is that they really enjoyed it, even if they got a rejection, because I was just telling them like straight up what it was, what they can do better. And I think sometimes some companies, or let's say some managers, are scared of the fact of saying the wrong thing that can be used against them in case of lawsuits and stuff. But hey, at the end of the day, what's the probability? Like, how much percent of probability do you have of having a lawsuit, and why should they like pull up a lawsuit? Because honestly, who are not being hired, it's a fact. It's like if one candidate was better, then the candidate was better, and you can tell that like in a very professional manner. And I think that's important. But what you mentioned as well regarding metrics, I have the feeling, and this is something the past 2 years I was really trying to dig into is, and this is probably also like a neurodiversity kind of thing. The majority of humans, they need control. They need calculation. They need numbers. They need metrics. They need evidence. I hate this word evidence. I hate it so much. They need evidence for everything. And my work has never been with a lot of evidence. If you are going to have, I don't know, I'm going to have a job interview next week. They're going to ask me for like specific numbers and data and whatnot from my past 16 years. I'll probably tell them like, oh, I know how many people I hired, but if you are asking me like in which company we have reduced like the time to hire or the turnover or we increased the candidate experience and those kind of things, ooh, that's really, really hard for me. But I also understood that a lot of companies at least need the basics. So I started like documenting a little bit more of my achievements and stuff. So at least I can present like a few things on paper, basically. But I think that processes should not be like too extensive. They should not be like too much data driven because we're still working with humans and the soft factors you cannot measure. You can measure basics like how was the process for you as a candidate. You can measure if you reduce time to hire, or you can measure, I don't know, if they have been happy with the offer and the benefit of the company. Even though I have to say, in my previous companies, I worked for more smaller organizations and there's no benefit. It's a little bit like, like I think these kind of elements you can measure, but we can also overdo it. And that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, that happened to me recently. So as I'm building out my feedback forms in Lever, which is my favorite ATS so far,
Hmm.
I was thinking too much into it and like really over engineering the feedback form. Let me do a drop down for location, score. It was like 10 or 12 different things that I needed to focus on in the interview. And then I realized I was only filling out one or two sections. And even for me, that's if I'm building this product for myself and I'm not using it, I'm like, this is a red flag for everyone. So I just got rid of everything. I said the way I like to interview is like, again, having the conversations. I type freely, and then gauging on, judging from where the conversation goes, I'll touch on compensation maybe early or later, relocation if that comes up, work authorization. And it's never like a linear conversation. It's never a linear process. So now I just have everything just in this box. And as I type, I just put white space between it. And it works so well for me. And then I realized when people actually have where the rest of the interviewing panel actually read my feedback forms and they have some feedback, they can just drop a note in there. But yeah, even I've been guilty of like, hey, this needs to be airtight, right? It needs to be perfect. And then at the times I'm like, let's just go back to the basics. And I'm hoping, with AI, that we can really focus on the basics. Yes, let the AI help with the note taking, which I still do, but I still hand type everything in my conversations. I feel like if I miss that specific delivery of what they just mentioned about a technology or something they built, yeah, maybe Fireflies will capture, but I wanted to type it in shorthand because I highly doubt anyone on the interviewing team is going to go to Fireflies first. They're going to read my notes first. My notes need to be, cohesive. It makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not too sure where I was going with that, but I just wanted to feedback forms. Yeah, I just wanted to share because I did have an issue myself. I'm building something for myself, which I think
Yeah.
we solved pretty quickly. So
Yeah. Well, I think regarding notes, I think you touched a very important topic. I mean, of course, you have to give feedback to management, right? But Um, I in my previous company, for example, I started becoming very transactional in my communication, but at the same time, they also knew me. They called me like chief happiness officer, and they knew that my communication was just very transactional. So no one was mad with me because I'm not a big sugarcoater. But I started to actually do bullets and just point out like the three main points what I identified during the interview that is beneficial for the role specifically. So I'm not over engineering, I'm not typing too much. I'm not like, in Switzerland there is a tendency to write very long emails. I mean, who's gonna read that.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't. And like the previous months before I left my company, I was even using ChatGPT sometimes, you know. So you can speak in with your phone and it pops out like 2, 3 notes. Obviously, you're not giving in any names or whatever. So from a data protection point of view, everything's good. It's not just regarding the content. And yeah, it was really helpful. But at the same time, I think for me, having the 3 bullets is absolutely more than enough. And we have been taking very good decisions with very good candidates. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of over engineering in everything, but linear thinking is a thing in a lot of companies. And everyone is linear, right? And as humans, yeah, as you said earlier, we should have just a conversation. I mean, just as humans, you know, and not I am interviewing you and you should be afraid.
Yeah.
Which is
Oh
also
my
like a
God. Thank
narrative
you.
that's existing, probably with the pros and
Yeah.
cons. But yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how it got to this point, um, to where interviewing has been going on for, I don't know, multiple decades. We'll call it 100 years, right? And it's always been, you should be glad you're interviewing with me, or you should be grateful, or we're only going to hire 2 positions. I feel like we should be better than that as just a society. You know what I mean?
Yes.
The moment folks come into a company after they're hired, you get to see the real like personas of people anyhow. Like, why don't you just be real from the get go? You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I think we'll get better insights into both individuals. Like maybe someone on the hiring side needs to get better at interviewing,
Hmm.
and you can't really understand who you are in that capacity unless you just be who you are, right?
Right.
You don't need to put a hat on and say I'm the hiring manager. And I think what's really cool about the folks I work with now is they're really good at just being themselves. And I've gotten, as a TA person, so you get very lucky and you meet some folks that just love to talk to people and love to share the product and idea of the mission naturally, right? It isn't like you're
Right.
trying to filter out folks. But along those conversations or throughout those conversations, there's mental notes of like what things that, were strong signals and some things that may not be, aligned with, just the company in
Yep.
general. But I want to shift gears really quickly and just ask you maybe some about your job search journey, how you've gotten your roles, and then we can kind of close out with some of the best advice you can give, or maybe some tips and philosophies around
Sure.
how job seekers can continue to navigate their journey. So yeah, what's been your journey like? How have you gotten your roles? Was it through applications, referrals, networks? Yeah, let us know.
I think, like, as I mentioned earlier, I think my first role or my first, let's say, apprenticeship kickoff was through a connection that my dad had. And after that, it was a lot of network, a lot of network. I always had people that recommended me for roles. And I think throughout my journey of 16 years, I maybe had maybe maximum 2 positions that I got because I applied with my CV. So
Mm-hmm.
I think connection is key, having the right network. And also, if people know you, if you are kind of like special,
Okay.
I think it's just a lot easier to get the foot in, you know, and to uh, to to actually also like gain the next step in your career.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think a majority was really through connections, and sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but I think also like this is part of aging. At some
Mm-hmm.
point, it's not the fancy title and the salary per se that keeps you motivated or gets you into the next job, but the values the companies are so important because I am absolutely reluctant to work with companies that are like treating people like trash. And there is a lot of companies out there that are still
Still,
doing
yeah.
that. Especially what you said earlier, this kind of narrative like from the 60s that people can be happy to be interviewed and even things C-suite executives are still saying like they can be happy that they still have a job. You know, oh my God. Like these are the kind of things where I'm like, yeah, this is just like a walking red flag. I don't want to work for these companies. And
Right, right, right.
actually by gut feeling you can feel that quite easily
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
nowadays. But yeah, I think this is how I got into roles.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and then I guess maybe on the same question, right? I guess you're probably going to say, hey, to land a role, do your best to network. But how do you maybe make that simple for folks? I'm still trying to understand how to teach folks how to network, but I think it's more of a natural like process, right? So how would you say
Yeah.
folks should network, or where should they start as far as us living in this digital era, digital age of AI?
I mean, look, I think I have the feeling that you and me, we are quite on the same page. We are
Mm-hmm.
wired like pretty similarly, but
Mm-hmm.
I think regarding networking, my experience is that a lot of people, because anxiety is something that is so deeply rooted in society,
Mm-hmm.
I have the feeling that a lot of people are pretending and a lot of people are wearing a mask. And this mask, we touched on it earlier, right? Why are you not being yourself right from the beginning? The mask you can hold up like for 6 months, or if you're good for 1 year, but at some point your true self will come out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the big, let's say, win is if you are just being brutally honest with yourself and with others. And yeah, sometimes, you will have kind of confrontations or like arguments, discussions, or whatever, because people are not being on the same page as you. But I think this kind of like criticism, if you are being your true self and if you are authentic, is something you kind of have to as well learn to deal with. So I'm not everyone's cup of tea, but neither is everyone my cup of tea. And I think once you are realizing that, and I think this is also maybe part of adulting process, kind of. And I'm still feeling sometimes I'm not an adult, but I just think that it's just really, really important to be yourself. And I think one message I would love to share with everyone is that you have your values, your moral, your standards, and your ethics, and you should never lower themselves to give the opposite, the other person, comfort because they feel
Mm-hmm.
like threatened by your authenticity. Or I have seen like a lot of dynamics, and I think that's just garbage. Like, I think it's really important you stay yourself, and then at the end of the day, the right things, the right people, the right network will follow, and you will have opportunities coming up with environments that are really valuing you as a person. And I think that's, I would say, like really powerful.
Gosh, again, so beautifully spoken. I couldn't have articulated that well. I love that. I love how you just kind of wrapped it up with just be yourself, but in a way where you're not necessarily taking on someone else's responsibility. And I think if we do that as an interview or interviewee or society, you're not holding that extra weight in the back of your mind of like, wow, I should have done that, or wow, that wasn't really me, because that carries with you
Yeah.
throughout your day, throughout your weeks and months in life, right? And touching on like the whole anxiety piece and the imposter syndrome piece, and the more you practice just being you, the easier it is to have these conversations and join a podcast and be on LinkedIn and connect with folks. So
Yeah.
I think that was a fantastic way to share that, and yeah, appreciate that. Very cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think the the question I identified as well for myself last year, that was the utmost powerful tool for me personally, is with every conversation I have with people, I'm asking myself afterwards, what version did that person bring out in me?
Man, that's awesome.
It's like sometimes you get into defense mode because someone is trying to manipulate you or to ask you stupid questions that have nothing to do with your area or something like that in interview, to diminish your expertise and to maybe pay you like a low salary. And this low ball and kind of like behavior is something I really hate. But there is still like a lot of like, yeah, these narcissists and psychopaths being in management, trying to really diminish people. What we touched earlier, that people can be happy that they're interviewed or having a job. Ask yourself what version they bring out in you. And this is a very powerful question you can use in every area of your life. If you have a partner, or if you are interviewing for a job, or with your family, I think it's very powerful to ask yourself that question,
Yeah.
to listen better to your gut feeling, I think.
There we go. Yep. 100%. All right, before I forget, you've got a book out. I did forget, so I'm glad I remembered.
Yes.
Where can folks find you? What are you up to nowadays? Are you in a TA role? Are you looking for a role? Let's kind of wrap up with that if you don't mind.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so I started officially looking for a new job January this year. So I'm still looking for a talent acquisition gig because I really love it. I love to excite people and to get people on board and give them a good experience. To yeah, work 60 to 80%. That's where I'm standing at the moment, and I definitely want to work remote. So going back to an office is not an option for me.
Okay.
If there is an office, I'm happy to pop by from time to time, but not with fixed dates and fixed hours and stuff like that. I need flexibility. And this is where my creativity is actually kicking off. So this is where I'm at. I started my own company last year. We are finalizing the platform. So basically, we're building a one-stop platform for neurodivergent people where they can just access and get help, educational content, community, supplements, everything they need only for neurodivergence. And of course, for the allies that want to learn more about it, I think that's very important. So we foster like a sense of understanding within our society and to also enhance our society and also maybe just normalize a few quirks people are
Of
times
course.
also LinkedIn. But you know, there was this one lady. She said the other day that there was a candidate that said, "Hi, Jacqueline," or something like that. Is a company car included? Because there was no information in the job spec or something like that. Regard, and she was like, "Yeah, that's really rude. That people are so direct, and this is not really a beautiful, nice, professional message." And I'm like, "Well, that's your narrative. That's your interpretation. You put in something negative in." Which is at the end of the day, I'm sorry to say, but it's your problem. It's a very fair, valid question because it was probably a sales job or something like that, and a company car, yeah, should then be part of the job description if it isn't. But
Mm-hmm.
in any case, I just wanted to say before I completely lose everything I wanted to say
It's okay.
that where was I before? See, here we go.
We were talking about where can they find you? You wrote a book.
Ah, yeah, perfect.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so my book is Why Suddenly Everyone Has ADHD, because I think that at the moment I'm hitting a nerve with it. The landscape of diagnosis has been rising for different reasons, for good reasons, for very good reasons. But at the same time, there's also these people that are trying to find excuses for their own behaviors, linking it to ADHD, which is not nice. This book that I have been writing is very, very short. It's very thin, so it's not another project for people. It's very easy to read, very simple. And I have been actually packing like a lot of content in terms of like research, data, and paper into very small content that is easy to read, understandable, and also interesting for people that are not having the condition, so it can be found on Amazon. There's a Kindle version and there's also a paperback version that can be physically sent to your home.
Wonderful. And then LinkedIn, the handle is just your full name, LinkedIn /
Yeah,
Lisa Garrelts. Okay.
it's just Lisa Garrelts. Honestly, I have been Googling my name a few times just to see like how many Lisa Garrelts are out there. There is a few in the US with the name, but I am actually on LinkedIn just to not get it wrong. It's just LinkedIn and then Lisa Garrelts, one word.
Wonderful. It's hard to
That's
get that as a handle for any social, so that's beautiful. All right. Any last tidbits? Any last closing comments before we wrap up?
Always trust your gut feeling in everything you do. And don't let society tell you that you shouldn't judge too early or, like, you know, see how things are evolving. No, if your gut feeling's shit, just listen to it.
If it's shit, listen to it. I love that. We're gonna copyright that. If it's shit, listen to it. All right. Well, thanks for your time, Lisa. Thank you everyone for joining us. Till next time.
Thank you so much, Henry. See you next time. Bye.